wanted to give an introduction to what Africode is, for those of you guys that don't know. So Africode really started so that we could have a community of Africans learning how to code. And so right now we have basically two platforms, so two ways that we do it. The first way is through what you guys are part of right now called AfricodeX. So monthly we have we have a tutorial on something that we feel is very important for us that we can learn with. So this week it's to meet people. And we have this monthly, so it's a Saturday monthly, and we all gather together. And then secondly, we have our monthly, not monthly, we have our mentors program. And so what we have is that we have people in industry like myself, mentoring people studying computer science or engineering in school. And the goal is to make sure that this person graduates with a computer science or engineering degree, right? So one thing though that I did want everyone to do is, I don't know who's sharing their screen, is go to Africode.org quickly and join the Africode community. So you see join the Africode community, go in the section, and so that way we have, we have a way to reach you about, the mentors program, about Africode X, and about possible job opportunities if we have any. Okay? Bumi, you can start now.
Okay, hi, my name is Bumi. I work in technology and banking, and today I'm going to be going through an introduction to databases, but touching on NoSQL databases in particular. Okay, so the agenda for today is we're going to, first of all, if you're just joining, there's some stuff you need to download for the practice segment of this talk. So I'm just going to quickly show you the links. If you don't have time, if you're having issues downloading it, I think it's important that you listen, and then you can go over to YouTube and go along with the tutorial again and try once your stuff is ready and all the stuff you've downloaded isn't giving you any trouble. So we're going to touch about how would you store large amounts of data, what is a database, types of DBMSs, SQL versus NoSQL, CRUD operations, and then our practical example. So don't worry if any of these words sound strange to you. I'll go over them. And for the practical example, I guess I can quickly show you, and because I've been really excited about this. So basically, we're just going to, one of the things we're going to teach you during the practical example is how to communicate with a NoSQL database remotely, and how to own NoSQL database, and how we'll give you the sample app, which is basically you enter your name, for example, a song you like, and I like Short Skirt right now by Easy. And we're going to show you how you communicate with your database and read from it and put stuff into it. But I'll go over that in more detail. Stuff you need. So first of all, you need a local installation of CouchDB. And the way I think about CouchDB is a database, but it's just like any application you use for PC. And by doing that, you need to go to this website, zip file, unzip it. And once you do that, double click on the couch icon. Once you do that, if you're on a Mac, this little icon will open up. You should get this dashboard open up as well. If the dashboard hasn't opened automatically, you just need to go to localhost, this port number, 5984, and for utils, and you should get the dashboard open. And the second thing you need is Postman, and you need Chrome to be able to use Postman, and you can do that. I think we posted the link in the chat, and basically it's a Google Chrome app. Click the download button here. I already have it, so it says launch. It says launch for me, but for you, say download. And so once you've done that, we'll give you 5 minutes towards the end to download it if you haven't yet, but if you have, we'll just go ahead. Okay, so before I begin, I want this call to be as interactive as possible, so free flow to ask questions at the end. So the first thing to know before learning about databases is why you actually need them. So imagine if you wanted to build an application to store every Afrobeat song since the 1950s before it was called Afrobeats. How would you do that? Would you store it in a file, in a list, or in an Excel spreadsheet? So I'm going to pose this question to you. Why would you put them in any of these options, or why wouldn't you put them in any of these options? So does anybody know why you wouldn't store large amounts of data in a list or a flat file or in an Excel spreadsheet, or why you would? Anyone? Okay, so I'm just gonna, I guess everyone is quite shy on the call, so I'm just gonna go and tell you why you wouldn't put it in a list. So you wouldn't put it in a list because with most applications, dynamic data you store while it's loading will probably be gone while in your application. Also, you wouldn't want to store a huge amount of data in a list. So imagine if you had you wanted to store every single hip hop song, every single rock song. That would be a lot of data that your application will have to load in it. That affect the speed. You wouldn't do the same thing for the flat file because the flat file will have the same kind of issue. And also the flat file will be hard to access. Like, how would you know where to find a particular song you're looking for? Would you always have to loop through the whole flat file to check it? And you wouldn't do the same with the Excel spreadsheet because for one, they're not a lot of APIs to for most programming languages, and it also has the same issue as a flat file. Okay, so the correct answer of where you store a huge amount of data is in a database. So a database is a collection of or related organized data which can be stored in several forms. So I like to just think of the database as any application or kind of like a storage system. And with any kind of storage system, you need some way to access that storage. And that's where database management systems come from. And they're simply software that follows a set of rules that allow users to manage and maintain databases. So for this tutorial, I'm only going to touch on two types of DBMSs, a relational DBMS and a NoSQL DBMS. So in order to understand what NoSQL is, we first need to understand what SQL is. So, and SQL comes from relational DBMSs. So in relational DBMSs, data is usually normalized, is normalized. Hello? Sorry. I think someone has a bit of background noise. Okay. So yeah, so relational DBMSs, data is usually normalized or usually and are usually related to one another by a foreign key or primary key. And what I mean by normalized there is that it's stored in such a way that you don't have any repetition of data. Because if you think about storing a large amount of information, you want as little as possible repetition, so you're not wasting storage space. And primary keys are just unique identifiers of data that way. And data in relational databases are usually stored in a fixed predefined structure, and this is usually similar to a table kind of structure like you see in Excel. And the way you would communicate with a relational DBMS, and by communicate is for data, how you put things into it is through SQL, and SQL is structured querying language, and it's just like a programming language, but it's particular to databases. So examples of relational DBMSs are Oracle, SQL, MySQL, and PostgreSQL. So So can anyone kind of guess what the difference between a NoSQL DMS is? Do I have any takers?
I could try.
Okay. Okay. It's pretty obvious.
NoSQL doesn't use structured query language.
Exactly. It's that obvious. It just doesn't use SQL. It just doesn't use SQL. And there are different types of this, and there are different types of these DBMSs, and they manage data in different ways. Some use key-valued pairs, some use columns, some use documents, some solve them in kind of a graph kind of structure. But the reason for NoSQL is because of how structured SQL is, comes to things with doing handling big data, you kind of want less structure so you can have more flexibility. And NoSQL database usually gives you that compared to SQL databases. And NoSQL databases are big with stuff like Twitter, where you want people to put comments, you want people to put pictures of stuff, but you don't want to have kind of like a roll of data that everyone has to do. Everyone has to have this particular data attached to a certain amount to certain data. And SQL sometimes kind of forced out, relational databases kind of forced out, but NoSQL databases is kind of like a free reign, and it's more the application that kind of puts that structure. But if you had a NoSQL database on its own, you have free reign to manipulate anything you want. And examples of that are Cassandra and CouchDB. And CouchDB is what we're going to be using today. I don't know, does anyone know any examples of SQL and NoSQL databases they have played around with before?
I used MongoDB before.
Okay, so MongoDB, yeah, I think it's a key value based NoSQL, and it's really good, or is it document based? I need to cross check that, but yeah, that's an example of a NoSQL DBMS. Yeah? Does someone have a question? Okay, so SQL versus NoSQL. So as I said, SQL is just like, it's a querying-based language for communicating in databases, and its syntax is Its syntax is pretty much that. So you would select from example database, and you put in like a query parameter, like where an ID is 5 in your database. With NoSQL, some of them you communicate with rather than using SQL, you use stuff like a HTTP request. So in our example today, which in the database we're using, which is CouchDB, you communicate with it using a HTTP request. Does anyone know what HTTP is? Yes, I did ask that. But does anyone want to tell me what it is? Or
Declan, do you have an answer? It sounds like you do.
Well, I don't want anything.
what?
Hypertext.
Okay. So yeah, so that's what it is. So a HTTP request, and just like that, you would, as if you were communicating with a website or a server somewhere, you would put in the host URL for your database, the database name, the ID for it. So I'm basically doing this same request, but with NoSQL. So I'm passing in the ID here, and then if you wanted to with NoSQL, you can add additional query parameters. So if you wanted to get kind of like a field or anything like that. So what I'm going to go through today is doing CRUD operations. So CRUD operations are just basically the main functions you will ever need to do with a database. So you need to create, read, update, and delete. Yeah, and that spells out CRUD. Okay, so to our practical example. So I don't know, does anyone have any questions? Have you guys been able to download Couch and Postman? Or I was hoping to give you guys like 5 to 2 minutes to do that if you haven't. So that's what you need to go along with the example. So first of all, we're going to communicate with a remote NoSQL database using Postman. And then afterwards, we're going to play around with this app that I made just for you guys. And for this app, we're just going to focus mainly on the CRUD operations to add in this playlist. It does other stuff like if you click on this link,
I have a question. So
yeah.
I don't know if I missed this, but I was waiting for the real world reason why we pick NoSQL over SQL. Is it because of did you go over this yet, or?
I touched upon it lightly. So NoSQL, it's you need to look at your business case. So for example, when it comes to transactional data, SQL is usually better for stuff like that. So if you wanted to do kind of like a banking app and you know exactly what fields, so actually that's not good. So let's say, for example, you wanted, that is a good example, and you wanted each user to have, every time they put in a transaction, you want to know the name of the transaction, you want to know what time they did it, you want to know when they did it, and that's all you wanted. You don't need any kind of information. Everyone will put in those exact 4 fields. Then you're better off using a SQL database. For NoSQL, it's mainly when you want more flexibility with your data and you don't particularly want any structure. You want to just analyze the data. So let's say you wanted to do a survey of people who you want to know more about, like people in your area. Do they have a dog? What kind of dog it was? What kind of cat it was? Do they have a dog? What kind of house they have? If they have a flat, how many bedrooms is the flat? And you don't want it in any particular structure. You just want to collect data. Then you're better off using a NoSQL database. Sometimes because of the way there's a lack of structure with SQL, it's not good, as I said, for stuff like transactional data, because let's say you wanted to subtract from someone's account. If you don't know, if you had a NoSQL database and in your application you didn't force people to, I don't know, have a certain column for something you wanted to get subtract something from, you wouldn't use a NoSQL, because what if nobody has put in data and you didn't put any restrictions to make them of data? You would have issues there. So SQL is better for structured stuff. You know what data you want. It's better to just go with that. You know what data you want. And NoSQL data is when you're kind of still thinking about it. You're not necessarily sure what kind of fields you want people to put in. At the end of this slide, I put like kind of a link of a really good resource that explains it more detail, and it has use cases you can read about to kind of determine if you're making something, or should I use SQL or NoSQL. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so so any other questions before we go into the practical?
Sorry, where do are we going to get the code?
Yeah, okay, so to get the code, it's on GitHub. If you don't know how to use Git, you just need to go to the URL. I think it's been posted in the chat already.
Not quite yet.
I'll just post it in the chat. And it should take you to this practice branch here, and you can either download the code as a zip file, or you can download it as a, or you can clone the repository. So that's really up to you. Okay, so before we get into the app, I just wanted to run through communicating with a remote NoSQL database using some HTTP requests. And to do that, if you have Postman installed, I have this folder here, which has all the requests we're going to do today. I'm just going to post that in the chat. And when you go to Postman, it should, once you click on that link, it should open up this Africode Afrobeats folder. Okay, so right now, I've put in the URL of I've put in the HTTP request. I've said I've wanted all documents from this database, and I put in this query parameter to include all docs, because with CouchDB, it's kind of funny like that. When you get all the documents, it just gives you IDs and revision numbers, and it doesn't actually give you the data. So you always need to put like include documents so you can actually have in the data. So first off, with our CRUD operations, we are going to create some data. So I've already put in the username and the password to this database in that request. And the body is just going to be a simple JSON object. I assume everyone knows what JSON is, but just for people who might not know what it is, I know, does anyone on the call want to tell me what JSON is?
I could try.
Okay.
I think JSON stands for like JavaScript object notation, and it's usually like a way to represent objects in key value pairs. So like in the JSON body example that you have now, name will be the key and song will be the value.
Exactly. And exactly. And so with this, we're just gonna put in, you can put in more, if you want to test this out, you can put in more more key value pairs. And this is the flexibility I was talking about with NoSQL versus SQL. With SQL, most times, if you want to add something to a table in a database, for every field of that table, you would need to put in something, even if it's a null. But with NoSQL in this database, I have no predetermined files. If I want, I can add a new field called things. So I'm not under any strict use of any sort of, I'm not under any predefined structure of how my data should be. So I'm going to click send. So this is with CouchDB. The request to create is usually a post, data you want to post in, and the database you want to go to. So I've gotten a success message from there, my ID number and my revision number. So a revision number is something unique to CouchDB. And what it is that CouchDB wants to always make sure that everyone has the latest version of data. So it does that by using the revision number. So what this means is that if I change the data, and let's say you've loaded the data, I would now have a different revision number because I've updated the number, and you have a different one. So if you're trying to update that same document, you'll be trying to update it with the old revision number, and it will complain that there's a conflict. So you then need to refresh your data to find out what the right revision number is. So it's always just trying to keep the integrity of the data with the revision ID. So now that I've created, if I go back to my read, which would be a GET request, I can see here that my document has been added. I can see my ID and my revision number. So let's say I want to update the document. So I would, with CouchDB, you need to add in the IDs to the request here. You also need to pass it in with the JSON object you're passing with the update. And you also need to pass in the revision number. And this is always just to, as I mentioned, to make sure that I'm trying to update the correct version, the latest version. So what I want to do is I want to change the name from songs to jams, and I want to add in something, a new field called type. And if I read it again, the data has been updated. The put request, and the delete is a delete request, obviously. So I'm going to take the ID and I'm just going to add it to the URL. It also it's also requiring me to put in the revision number, because again, it wants to make sure that I have the latest document, so I'm sure that what I want to delete. And it's gone. So if I read again, I have nothing in my database. Okay. So
I have a
going to this app.
I have a quick question. So I saw like the IDs all look like generated IDs, but you don't have to use those, right? For CouchDB, you can actually you have the do you have the option of like having your ID start from 0, for example, and then like incrementing?
With CouchDB, it's usually pre-generated.
Okay.
I've never actually tried to set mine because I do kind of want that responsibility.
Okay.
But it's usually predefined.
Okay.
For you.
All right. I think it would be interesting.
Every time. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's some use cases where it might be useful to be able to define your own, not like define, but like say I want you to start from 0 and then increment from there, instead of like having these. Well, this is probably safer, but anyway.
Yeah, I can try and look into that and probably like send an email out at the end too.
No, it's not a big deal. It's fine.
But to be fair, I think there's actually functionality for you to determine like the indexes that you want to use as like IDs for the documents you're posting to Cloudan, to Cloudan. So like since you're just posting JSON objects, right? If they have like, if all of them have like the name attribute or something, and you want to be able to search, and that attribute is unique, and you want to be able to search by that attribute, then it should be, you just have to require CouchDB to set that as an index in the same way that ID is an index, and it will be able to search by that attribute in the same way that you search by ID or update by ID. So.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Is there? I'm sure there's probably a way to have like multiple fields, like be your key, right? So like a combination of fields.
Yeah. So yeah, you could have multiple fields.
I see. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So, going on to this. So, basically, for this app to work, you need to, if you've loaded in your if you've downloaded CouchDB On your dashboard, you're just going to, again, so you're going to create a new, so I'm going to call this Afrobeats. Right.
I have a quick question. So I'm still trying to understand the syntax. Like for instance, you had the create, update, and delete. So what is the difference? Looking at the URL, I wasn't able to tell what is the difference between, like for instance, create and update. Is the syntax different, or how do you tell? I'm just looking at the URL.
Okay, so for create request, and you don't need to pass in anything in terms of the URL, but then you just pass in the object, so your JSON object with your request. Update is slightly different because it's a put request, and you have to pass in the ID in the URL, and then you also have to pass in the ID as part of the JSON. You pass that in with underscore ID, and then you also need to pass in the revision number by underscore rev with the name as underscore rev, and you pass in the ID number. So that's the difference. And I'll just go over delete as well. Delete is a delete HTTP request, and you pass in the ID as well as the revision number. But the revision number can go in as a query parameter, question mark here, and you put in rev, and then you put in equal to the. So that's the difference.
So
yeah.
So how do you keep track of that kind of information? Like for instance, the that ID. You might have multiple IDs. So how do you keep track to know which ID you care about at that moment?
So with my app, I've kind of done that programmatically. So if I'm just going to open up the code here. So what I've done is I'm using a table to store my data. And this table comes in with a built-in functionality. So when I return the data from the database, I always return the ID as well. So in your app, you would always return your ID as well, so that you can always send the ID to a data you've selected. And with this app, I'm just trying to look for it for you.
So basically, you need some way of storing the ID and rev numbers locally or something like that?
Yeah, so every time you pull them, you need to store them locally as well. So the same way, every time you pull the data out, you wouldn't just want to just pull in like the name. You'd always want to pull in the ID as well if you needed to do some kind of operation on it. But if you didn't, users to be able to edit it, then you wouldn't pull in the ID and the rev number as well. You always have to pull in the ID and the revision number as well. I think here what I have is I'm using a bootstrap table. I'm just trying to look for where it is.
So I think someone asked a similar question, but there should be a way to post or to create or to post without your data associate ID, right?
So the way I can think of it, because the thing I've never tried to manipulate CouchDB ID, but as I think it was Dorito that mentioned that if you wanted to, you can pass in your own ID as an attribute. And if you didn't want to store the ID all the time and you knew your data was unique, or you would query with those fields, update your data that way. So for example, let's say you had a field for name and number, and you knew name and number was always unique. So if you wanted to select out the ID or you wanted to update that data, you could probably do a link for the CouchDB queries, but I think you should be able to pass in the URL, do slash the database and put in the query parameter of where field equal to this is equal to that, and you could update it that way. Confirm. But it's in one of the links at the end of the presentation. Was that helpful, or?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, yeah, we can move on. I'll see if I can find that kind of information. I think that could be possible, yeah.
Yeah, it should be possible. Like if you, with any, you could query based on the self-defined ID you put in your in the list of fields for your data. But the thing about it, I'm not sure about the revision number, because CouchDB forces you every time to do updates and deletes with the revision number. So the way I'm thinking about it is that if you, for example, you were querying by the name of the field, I think you still need to get what the ID and what the current revision number is, and then update your data. But I put in a link at the end of the chat, and you can kind of look at the CouchDB documentation for more on that. But in my code here, for example, return my row of data and I pass it into this table, and I can pick up the ID and the rev number to build. I wanted to update it, and yeah, so I return the ID and the rev number, and whenever I want to update it, I just use these two parameters and into a new object if I wanted to update them, or date the data, or pass it into the URL if I wanted to delete the data. Okay, so in the practice branch of the code, it's not, I kind of left some areas blank, so I'm just going to switch to that branch because right now I'm on master. Okay, so so here in my code for that little app, I'm using Ajax to make the request. And I don't know if anyone wants to handle what Ajax is.
I don't know. Kule, you should go for this one.
Ajax is a asynchronous JavaScript. It's used to like, or I don't know how to explain this. It's used to like having to refresh the page.
So
I
guess you use Ajax. You use Ajax to make requests. So let's say you want a resource for something, right? So let's say you're loading your page, and your page has the musician's name, the musician's like some other information. But there's other things on your page that are already there, and you don't really need to make a request to get that information. Then you can use an Ajax request to get that information, and then when it arrives, you can use it to populate. So you don't have to wait for your request to go and then come back before loading your page. Your page can be like loading, and then when that information is ready, you'll just populate it.
Yeah, exactly. So what I've done with this code is I have made certain functions here, and they start off with this comment function for interacting with DB. I have a create, read, delete, update. And what I've done is I have linked all those requests to the buttons on my screen, so the reader and update button. So I guess what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you the AJAX request for create, read all, and I'm hoping to coach you guys a bit and you guys to help me fill out the rest, just to like make sure you guys have gotten it. So with create, all I need to do is pass my DB. So what I've done is I've made some variables here. So this is my this is pointing to my local CouchDB. I created a database called test. I created a username called test, a password called test, and yeah. So the AJAX request for create is I pass in the URL for my DB. That is a post request. I say the content of what I'm passing in is JSON. My data is this new object, which is drawn from what I input on the screen, and I turn to a JSON object. I pass in, I say the data type is JSON again, and in the header, I pass in my username and password, and I encrypt it. If it's successful, if it's an error, I log the response. If I get a success message, I log the response. So with read is the same. I pass in the database on all documents. And remember how I mentioned that with Couch, when you say all documents, it doesn't always pass the actual data. It passes the IDs and the revision numbers. So I want to say include docs true, so I pass in this parameter. The read is a get request. Again, passing the username and the password, and then I log. And what I'm just doing here is I'm just, once I get all the data, so the data will be, I get all the rows of data out of my response, and I load the data into my table. So I pass into this variable, and this function always loads the data in here in my table on my UI. So this read, I just left it here for you guys, but this is if you wanted to read a particular document. The difference will be you put in the URL and you just see the ID of the document you wanted. And I was hoping we could fill in the rest. So with update, can anyone remember what I said, how you built the URL? Anyone?
ID and revision.
Yeah. So with that, I actually just need, so I need the ID. You actually pointed out something. So you don't, because I'm going to pass in the revision number with my, in my JSON. So I just actually remembered you don't always need to pass in the URL. So it's going to just put in the ID. And then can anyone remember what I said the request type was with the update?
Post.
Close. It begins with P as well.
Put? Is it a put request? Is that a thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a put request.
All right.
Yeah, so exactly. It's a put request. And again, JSON. And then with the delete, the delete is, can anyone remember what it is? Delete is quite similar to the update, except for one little detail.
Mm,
Anyone?
not sure.
Not sure. Okay. So I'm just gonna fill it in for you guys. So you add in the ID as well. And you pass in the revision number. That's just the little detail. So, with this, I'm just gonna put in the revision number variable from my selected item. And then can anyone remember what the type was for the delete?
Delete.
Exactly, yeah, delete. Okay, so we're done. So we're gonna test this out. So then there's one little thing. So this is not related to the. I'm kind of using.
Sorry, Bumi, before you move on, so what was the difference again between the update and the delete requests, like the URL?
So the URL, sorry, was the revision number.
So for delete, you need a revision number, but for update, you don't need a revision number.
Yeah, so for update,
Okay.
because you can pass in the revision number in the JSON that you pass in as well, you don't need to then put it in the URL. But with delete, you're not passing any data in the JSON, so you need to add it to the URL.
I see.
Add a query parameter.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so I need to. 1 second, I just need to set up something before I do the tutorial. Okay, never mind. Okay, so now that that's all set up, I'm just going to play with the app a bit. And so I'm going to read all. So this is all the data I've added in so far, and we're going to test out your request as well. Okay, so for the create, I'm going to put in my name again. And I'm running out of songs I actually like. But I'll put skin type. Mr. Easy again.
I don't believe in anybody that's not Mr. Easy.
Sorry, I'm gonna spell this wrong because we're gonna use this example as well. So I'm gonna create that, and if I read all again, it's in my database. And if I go to my local installation, I'm just gonna log in. It keeps making me log out. Okay, there we go. And again, with this, you always have to say include DOS because it doesn't do it. It just does the revision key and yeah. And we can definitely see the skin type Mr. Easy is my database. Also, with this, if this local installation of CouchDB, you can do all the parameters. You can add a new document. You can. It's just like it would be the same panel you would get if you had a CouchDB on Cloud Danta, anything like that. And it also gives you like the API URL if you wanted to get all the data and stuff. You do that, for example, and put this, it should return all the information. My PC is a bit slow, but there you go. So going back to this. So I think we did the delete together. So I'm gonna test that delete. So I've selected this, and because I'm not touching on Bootstrap, basically this table, I can get the selected item, and the way I've built my code is that I pass in that selected item with my delete. I don't know if you guys remember, but I'll just show you to make sure. So I get my selected item, I get the ID and the revision number from the selected item, and then if I do delete, and I reload the application, it's gone. And if I go to my database and I click all documents, I had one up here before and it's gone. So now I just have the 1, 2, 3, which is here, the 3 items I have. So I think we did the update together. So I'm going to click on this and click update and have this mode. I'm going to click save. So it's in my save button that I do the update. So if I read all, it's changed to Mr. Easy. And if I go to my document, I'm going to click include all docs, and it's now Mr. Easy. There is a bit of this code that I've also added, that if you click on this number, it should retrieve the icon, it should retrieve the song from Last.fm. If you want this to work really well, you just need to get an API key from Last.fm. It's quite simple. You just need to log in and just say you want a new API key and you get it. I tried to use SoundCloud, but they told me to wait a month. Because Last.fm, I'll show you. So now that I've added in that API key.
Pupi, can you share, at some point, can you share a link for the Last.fm so we can get our own API keys?
Okay.
Thanks.
So if you go to, so now it tells me it can find the songs in this link. I was going to make it prettier for you guys, but I ran out of time. And if I go to I've selected, it should find the song. So with Last.fm, you have to pay to play the song. As I said, I tried to get SoundCloud and I tried to use the YouTube API, but it was looking long because you need like your developer's account. And so I just went with Last.fm because it was quite easy to get. So yeah, so I think that ends my tutorial.
Sorry, just a quick question before you jump in. What exactly is an API?
So an API is basically just some kind of interface an application gives you to communicate with it. And most software like Last.fm or most applications, they usually require a key to let you use their API.
Cool.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
There. So thank you, everyone. I don't know if anyone has more questions. I put some additional resources to learn more about DBMSs, NoSQLs, and why you'd use them. And if you wanted to get a CouchDB loading on a remote server somewhere, Cardant, I think, allows you have it free for 30 days. So you can click that link at the bottom to do that. So yeah, so does anyone have any questions?
I just want that link for Last.fm.
Yeah, I think it's quite.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's
Are you running it
yeah,
on full Tomcat, like a server like Tomcat or something? Or?
No, it's just a file on my machine, not running on any server anywhere. Oh yeah, that is one, but good you brought that up. So because CouchDB doesn't, so when you load your CouchDB in configuration, not to use it if you're not running your app on a server somewhere, if you're just running it locally as a file, you want to go into your configuration and go to cores and disable and enable CORS because stops you from directly accessing like a link via HTTP if you're not on talking to it from, if you're not communicating from a website that's using HTTP, if you're communicating from a file, it will block you and you keep getting this CORS error. So make sure you enable that once you, if you're using your app locally. So with me, I'm just referencing the index file, not running it anywhere. Okay, so I'm gonna put the Last.fm API there. I know, does anyone have any questions or anything else?
Where can I get access to the code? Like if I want to, I don't know, I guess the complete version of the code.
So if you wanted the complete version, if you've already cloned it, all you need to do is go to master and go to the master branch, and everything is there apart from my Last.fm API key. If you wanted, and then you could just pull the code and everything should work fine. And that's a complete example. You can either download it or clone the repository. So I'm going to put this in the chat as well.
And Dimitri, I think we should put all the code for all the AfricodeX tutorials in our own GitHub, so everyone can just access it.
Yeah, it's true. It's already there.
Yeah, we have them.
Okay, good.
So thank you. Does anyone have any burning questions before I say thank you and end the call?
Yeah, I have one more question. So this is my first time in a session like this. I don't know who are the members of Africode and who are other participants like me. So can you guys give like an introduction for the Africode, members or founders or something like that?
Sure, I'll take that one. So so I founded Africode, and I'm joined here. I think we have Halima on the call and Dirichi, who I don't know if Damal is also on the call, who help out with Africode in general. But if you wanted to join like the Africode community, like I said earlier, just go to africode.org and join the community, and you'll have access to what we do on a monthly basis, the mentors program. You should be a mentor, by the way. And other like hackathons that we have coming up.
I think Africa is such a great initiative to do this tutorial.
All right, so I'll talk for like 2 seconds. So yeah, I'm Halima. Like Bissy mentioned, Durichi and I manage like the AfricodeX program and try to get people to come in and do presentations. So what we do is honestly we just find like Africans anywhere in the world who are in tech, and we're like, yo, you know how to do this thing. How about you come and teach us? And that's how we found Bumi, because I don't know if you guys know this, but Bumi is awesome. Bumi like wins like hackathons and things. So we literally just reached out to her and we're like, hey Bumi, would you like to teach something? And she was like, yeah, I'll do it. So that's how we kind of set this up. And then we have these calls once a month. And if you join the community, the reason we keep pushing this is that every time we have the call, then we'll like send you an email and let you know what we're teaching next. But also something that's important is we're looking for like, we're trying to figure out what people want to learn about. So I've posted like a link in the group chat for like it's like a little survey. It's very short. If you have like a topic, if there's something in tech that you really want to learn about, then please like feel free to let us know, and we'll like try to find someone and create like a talk like this. It would basically just be like someone teaching you anything you're interested in learning. But yeah, just know this little thing. Are there any more questions?
And everything's recorded, everyone. So if you didn't follow something, you can go back, excuse me, and go watch it again. Yeah,
it's another incentive to join the community, because when we upload, then we'll send you the link for like the video, and you can watch this again if you want. Do we have any other questions from anyone? All right. So without questions, I think we are at the end. Thank you very much for showing up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it and it was helpful for everyone who showed up. Look out for our next email. We'll have another one of these talks in April.